Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I think we're going to get a lot of good information on some best practices, risk and reward of pay attention to cybersecurity, and uh, hopefully some really good questions along the way. As Jeff mentioned, please do use the Q&A for any questions as we go through. We will be looking at that throughout. So if it's something appropriate while we're talking, we may just jump right on it. So please get it in there. And we'll, of course, do some more Q&A at the end of the session. I'd like to welcome Natalie Suarez from ConnectWise. Natalie's going to walk us through really a great presentation around cybersecurity, some of the major concerns, some examples of what's going on in the industry, and how to address them. So with no further ado, Natalie, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. Hello, everyone. And I assume it's good morning for most of you, but just in case, good afternoon as well. And the only important things on this resume is I am technical. I did start at my career as a software developer, and that I'm very passionate about threat intelligence, my family, and Lego, and not necessarily in that order. Depends on the day. So, our agenda, so you know what's coming. So, what is cybersecurity? What is this mysterious word that we hear so much that it's pretty much lost its meaning, right? What are some SMB cyber concerns? We love acronyms in cybersecurity. So, that's just small to medium sized businesses. That's you guys, and you guys includes everyone. I'm going to walk you through a phishing as a service attack so you can see how these bad guys act and what they do. We're going to talk about people, process, and tech, because as much as I'm a little nerd over here and love that tech, it's really so much more than just technology to keep you safe. We're going to talk a little bit about risk and responsibility. I'm going to give you a little analogy to wrap it up, and then I'm going to hand it back over to my new friend, Tom, and he's going to share some great info for you. All right. So basically, let's set the stage here. Times have changed. We all know that, right? Don't we all feel like our parents when we say that, right? So, back in the 90s, we didn't get, and even before, we didn't get in strangers' cars. And once the advent of the internet hit, we didn't meet people on the internet. I mean, very few of us actually did, right? But today, we have this little computer right here, which is much more powerful than that first real computer that I had. And we get on the internet, we look up strangers, and we get in their cars, and most of the time nothing bad happens. And I'm talking Uber and Lyft, guys. But that's how things have changed, and cybersecurity has changed too. And that's why we want to bring you this educational webinar and try to share some info with you on how you can help yourself. And really, feel free to be interactive. This will make it a lot more fun than me just sitting here and yammering at you. So let's start with some definitions, because who doesn't love a good definition, right? So Gartner, yeah, if you're not familiar with Gartner, you could think of them as a think tank. They evaluate technologies. They come up with definitions for technologies terms. And if you just take a quick look at their definition of cybersecurity, they really focus on the tech, which is okay. I mean, I believe the definition is partly correct, but I really don't think it's enough. If you were to ask me what cybersecurity is, I would tell you it's about managing risk. It's all about your risk tolerance, actually in combination with your business objectives. We understand, we don't have our heads in the sand, that security is a cost center for you. So it only makes sense when it reduces your risk or saves you money. So, what are some of those concerns you have as an SMB? And I'm really interested if any of this resonates with you. If you could give me a thumbs up or a yes or no, you're crazy lady in the Q&A, I'd really appreciate it. So, first of all, we, just like Gartner, we tend to think of it as an IT challenge, and it's really not. It's a business challenge. Business includes managing your risk from all types of perspectives, including cybersecurity. You have competing priorities. I'm assuming you're here today to learn that cybersecurity is not your business, like it's our business, right? Complexity of shifting to remote workforce, or even having a remote workforce. So, I I've talked to many people who run contracting businesses who've never had to worry about cyber before because things have changed. And now they have people connecting via iPads, via phones, via work computers out as a remote workforce. And that really, really spreads out your risk surface, right? Maybe you don't have anyone in your organization with cyber skills. Maybe you don't have a written and good business continuity and disaster recovery plan. That's a written plan and includes your backups. It's so much more than just backups. Like everything else, inflation has involved this industry. There are increased costs to respond and recover from incidents. There's global legislation. Did you realize that any privacy legislation, so if you have privacy legislation in the state of New York or the state of California, and you have customers there or in Europe, that you have to obey those privacy laws, it has nothing to do with where your business is located. Cyber warfare. I even have an example of a story where Russian hackers are actually targeting people in your area. Reputation damage. As a small business, we're no Home Depot or Target or Equifax. A cyber incident could really damage your reputation to the point that you're unable to recover. And, this is just what the stats say. I'm not trying to breed fear here. That's not my purpose. So I guess none of you have those challenges. I'm very glad to hear that, but I'm not sure I really believe you. So one of those great reports that I use in my work is a report put out by Verizon. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Verizon, right? It's the data breach investigations report, and this is the latest copy. And what this says, this chart, is that credentials, phishing, exploit vulnerabilities, and botnets are the four main ways that bad guys get into your systems. And I want you to notice credentials is the most prolific. And by credentials, what we mean is like when something gets hacked, like ChatGPT or Facebook, or your credentials end up on the dark web, and then bad guys buy these, and they automatically try to break into your systems using these credentials. We'll talk a little bit about more in a moment. And you have to have a plan to handle all of these. Many of you probably heard of Move It. That's a huge breach that happened, and that was due to a vulnerability in that software. Another stat, a new ransomware attack does occur every 11 seconds. Some of my sources actually say it's quicker than that, but I figured 11 seconds was ominous enough. How else have things changed? Well, back in the good old days, because who doesn't like to date themselves, right? Attackers had to be really smart. They had to understand the complexities of networks. They had to understand how to write software. They actually had to be software developers and network engineers. And that is simply not the case anymore. Anyone who has some cryptocurrency and a Tor browser, that stands for the onion router, and that's the way you access the dark web, can go to the dark web and buy anything their heart desires. And unfortunately, I mean anything, including malware and attacks. And they're not just going there and buying software and having to figure out on their own how to launch it against you. These bad guys who've been doing this for a really, really long time are not are actually making their services available to others. So they're providing the software, they're providing the servers and the platform to run the software on. They're providing what we call YouTube videos. I guess you could call them dark tube videos, right? They are providing payment processing. They are providing help desk. They are providing a true enterprise of organized crime to help anybody who wants to be a bad guy be a bad guy. All right. So, and sorry, guys, more bad news. And these are just stats. These are not, this is not to scare you. This is statistics. These are real numbers from real reports. And I've sourced every report that I am talking to you about today. So, according to the most recent data, only 61% of data is restored after paying the ransom. And you don't get to choose whether that's your most critical business data that allows you to continue operations, or if that is data that's really, tangential to your main business. And even more bad news, only 4% of companies recover all of their data after experiencing a ransom. Now, I do see we have a question here. And, and this is actually, I get asked this a lot. Are bad guys really coming after small to medium sized businesses? Why would they care about my data? So I have two answers to this question. One, you're asking the wrong question. The question really should be, do you care about your data? How long could you stay in business without access to your data? And number two is yes, unfortunately. Think of it this way. And we have another home analogy coming up, but bad guys casing my neighborhood. My door is locked. My neighbor's door is not locked because they don't have defenses. They may have the alarm sign, but their door is not locked. So that you want to have in your home defense in depth, right? You may have the yard sign, you may have an alarm, you have locks, so you have multiple layers of security so people can't get in your home, right? But the bad guy is going to go take the path of least resistance. And unfortunately, usually the path of least resistance is a small to medium sized business. Gone are the days of some really smart guy or girl sitting in his mom's basement, tapping away at the keyboard. I just showed you this is really happening, that they just go and they buy it and they're off to the races. And it's more than just paying the ransom. Notice I gave you a little bit of good news here. We're down 0.4 million for the average cost to organizations to recover from a ransomware attack. Although I wouldn't be jumping up and down and going yippee to 0.45 million. That's still a pretty good chunk of change, right? So I know this is an eye chart, but people love pretty colors. So look at all the pretty colors on this ominous slide, right? In the upper right-hand corner, I want to point out, this is an article from January 2023. I'm not making this up. There is a cybercrime ecosystem on the dark web. And guess what? Some of these threat actors very recently, Clop, and they're responsible for the Move It breach, have started posting the information exploited through that breach on the internet. You don't even need any special skills to get to it. I get asked a lot of questions about OpenAI, not today, but I'm going to answer the question anyway. Why should you care about OpenAI? Why should you care about breaches on Facebook? These are huge companies. Why should I care? Well, OpenAI is changing the way the threat landscape works, right? So you saw that some of the ways bad guys get in, phishing. OpenAI is really good at writing text, right? So think about this. So we used to tell you if you got an email that looked strange with like strange grammar or strange spelling, that it was probably a phishing email. Well, those days are long gone with the advent of ChatGPT. And then throw into the mix Facebook. Do you know a lot of people use the same credentials for their social media that they use for their business account? Do you know how many times Facebook has been breached? Neither do I, but I know it's at least once, and it's recently at least once, right? Well, when Facebook gets breached, what happens is those credentials get posted to the dark web, along with, those handy dandy little fun tools that like ask questions and say, what was your first boyfriend or girlfriend's name? What's your favorite color? All this stuff. Where did you grow up? What kind of car do you drive? What's your favorite kind of car? Guess what? Think of the power of that information, which you just gave to absolute strangers, combined with a tool like ChatGPT to make bad guys write a targeted phishing email that you will fall for. Hey, you're invited to this new car club for, Chevrolets, because who doesn't love a good Chevrolet? I don't know anything about cars, so that may have been just total nonsense, but you get what I'm saying. All I know is I drive a car. All right. Other things, there's this great term called pig butchering. Isn't that just awesome, Tom? Pig butchering. That sounds really cool, doesn't it? Well, let me tell you what pig butchering is. You see this beautiful face, cyber criminals build malware and plot fake girl bots. Well, guess what? There's also fake guy bots. And what these bots do is you go on to these dating apps, or maybe you even meet somebody through social media, not a specific dating app, right? and you meet this great person and you establish this wonderful relationship. And then this person just gets you. You start sharing corporate information about your company, maybe nothing too saucy, right? Or you share an inappropriate picture or two. We know that never happens, right? And all of a sudden they have something on you. And then they come out and guess what? It's not a real person. And they begin extorting you. That's pig butchering. Here, right here in your local neighborhood, a software flaw. This again, we call this a vulnerability in the industry. Happened in Suffolk County. Tens of thousands of Connecticut residents have personal information scooped up in massive cybersecurity breach. These are all stories from 2023. A big healthcare breach happened in Connecticut. Experts weigh in, you're going to be attacked. We like to say it's not if, but when. Look, LaGuardia, among nation's airports that were targeted by Russian hackers. Don't tell me that's not an effect of cyber warfare, because I assure you it is. So I promised you this great and exciting demonstration of how a phishing as a service attack. This is really available on the dark web for purchase. I don't recommend going to the dark web if you're faint of heart, because you're going to see a lot of ugliness out there. So please don't do that unless you're super curious and you have a strong stomach. Okay. There's two flavors of this attack that I know of. I'm sure there's more than two. One's called greatness, one's called evil proxy. And the way it works is we have a user and we have a target website that they're trying to get to. The target website is office.com. There is this we call an actor in the middle attack. And that's why I have this attacker picture in the middle. You know he's a bad guy because he's wearing a hoodie. It looks like that might be a Mac. Could be, I don't know, maybe he's running a Linux OS. Who knows what he's running? But definitely in the mom's basement, but that was beyond my drawing skills. So let's see what happens here. Okay, first thing I want to point out is everything is TLS encrypted. All you need to know about that, encryption means that it can't be read in plain text. And this means it's an HTTPS connection. And in the good old days, I take every opportunity I can to date myself, right? You were told if you went to a website and it said HTTPS that your information was safe. Sorry, guys, bad news. All that means is that it is an encrypted website. Where that encrypted data is going is not guaranteed by that HTTPS connection. It would take me all of about 5 minutes to purchase a certificate, if even that, and set up an HTTPS website. Doesn't mean you're safe. Notice the actor in the middle has set up his own website, a phishing website called office.com, and it's a phishing website. Now, the user is not going to see this phishing website. This website in the middle, or the server in the middle, we call this a proxy server. Proxy just means, just like if you sign a proxy for someone to vote for you or someone to do something for you, a proxy only means that this server is acting as a middleman. That means that it takes information from one location and forwards it to another. That's all you need to know. So this user gets an email, a phishing email that says, "Hey, Bob, pardon me, if your name is Bob, it's nothing personal. I actually know a Bob that I'm referring to, and he would kill me if he heard this." And Bob gets a phishing email. The phishing email is from Jen, the CEO, and it says, "Bob." Oh, no, I'm sorry. Wrong scenario. Okay. This one looks like it's Office. Sorry. Mixing my scenarios here just for fun. Okay. Come back to me. All right. So Bob, in this case, doesn't, the Jen's later. Bob gets a phishing email. Your Office credentials have been compromised, Bob, and you need to click right here, right this very second, or the world's going to explode and everyone's going to break into your network and it's going to be all your fault. So what did Bob do wrong there? First of all, Bob should have never clicked. Never click. Never, ever, ever, ever click, guys. If you're not expecting an attachment or an email from someone, just don't click. That is really the only safe action in today's landscape. If someone said, because think of it this way, if Tom sends me an email, well, I won't use Tom, I'll use Bob. If Bob sends me an email, I don't want to pick on Tom, and it says, "Hey, look at this great picture from my fishing trip." And I'm like, "Okay, Bob, number one, I didn't know you fished. And number two, why would I care that you went fishing, Bob?" And I pick up the phone and I call Bob and I'm like, Bob, did you really send me this? And Bob's like, no. Oh my gosh, I'm getting calls from all these people. Guess what? Bob was phished, and now that bad guy is sending emails from Bob's inbox. So it's no longer enough to rely on grammar. It's no longer enough to rely on, I know the person who sent it to me. You have to think, were you expecting that? And if not, don't click. Worst case scenario here, if Bob had just gone straight to office.com and changed his password, he would have lost 5 minutes of his day. But Bob's about to have a really bad day here. So Bob enters his username and password. It goes through the phishing site and it proxies or forwards those credentials to office.com. Now you may say to yourself, well, why do we care? Everything's encrypted. And you're right, everything's encrypted. And in this attack, the attacker doesn't even care to decrypt anything. And you'll see why in a sec. So the target website prompts for MFA. That is multi-factor authentication. It's like when you go to a website and you put in your credentials and then you get a text message and it says, put in this code. Now, we're not going to get into the best ways to do MFA. That is not the best way, but let me get off my soapbox so we can get through this. So that proxy site then prompts the user for that MFA. So Bob puts in his little code, he completes it, sends it back through the proxy site, which Bob doesn't see, and it forwards that code to office.com. So of course, office.com goes, oh, because it doesn't know that it's getting this info from a proxy site. And it says, oh, everything's good. This is where Bob's day gets really bad. What this happens is this creates something we call a session cookie. All you need to know about this cookie is this contains everything this bad guy needs to log in as you. So now this attacker has access to Bob's mailbox, has access to his SharePoint, to his OneDrive, to his PowerPoint. He could start exfiltrating data. He could start creating Outlook rules to forward information to himself. He could forward malware to everyone in Bob's contact list, including me. And that's how Bob has a really bad day. Now, why would I tell you that multi-factor authentication is important and then show you an attack where it can be defeated? Because if you're paying attention earlier, I said something about defense in depth. You need defense in depth. You need multiple tools and multiple ways to protect yourself. How could Bob have been protected here? Well, Bob could have been protected because he took security awareness training and he knew to never click on a link in an email. He knew he should go directly to office.com. Other ways that he could have been protected here is if he had something called a security information and event management system, and this attacker was sending out emails. By the way, when they do that, they clean up after themselves with rules too. So a human is very unlikely to see that attack. But if they had something like what we call a SIM, that would have seen that there was all of a sudden a large amount of email going out of Bob's inbox and rules were being created and deleted and messages forwarded. And that would have given someone a heads up that something bad was happening. If they were going to send out, deliver a payload, like a payload of a bad malware that, perhaps that they were going to try to execute on Bob's system, something called an endpoint detection and response system or a managed and detection and response system would have caught that with a very high likelihood. It's never 100%, but with a very high likelihood, these other tools would have helped and would have caught this type of attack. So all is not lost. You just have to have defense in depth. That's the end of Bob's story there. And one of those things too, that another thing that would help is having what we call a culture of cybersecurity, where Bob realizes he's screwed up and he clicked on something and shouldn't. So he goes and reports to the correct person that, hey, I clicked on something that I shouldn't have clicked on. And then what happens is they clean up and everything is great, right? Okay, so what do you need for minimum defense in depth? An incident response plan. Notice that's not tech. Multi-factor authentication, which I just explained. Number 3 and 4, all you need to understand about these technologies, I'm sure Tom would be happy to tell you more. We just don't have time for me to get into it. Number 3 is something that works on your desktop, uses AI for good, machine learning, user behavior analytics. Number 4 is something you could think of that manages your infrastructure, looks at what's happening on your network, whether it's cloud or on-prem. And the 5th one, we talked about this a little bit earlier, business continuity, disaster recovery, includes backup, but it's much more than a backup. And oh, by the way, you need all of these to get cyber insurance. People, process, and tech, three-legged stool. What happens if you lose one leg of a three-legged stool? It falls over. So people, things like security awareness training, process. Bob gets an email from Jen, the CEO. Here, now we're at the story that says you need to wire money right away to this vendor. And oh, by the way, the wire transfer information has changed. If Bob had a process that said, hey, we don't just wire money, especially if the wire transfer information has changed without getting these different levels of permission, um, that could have saved what's about to happen. Technology, how to use the technology. Are you training your people on the technology? So Bob wires this money because he gets this email from Jen, the CEO, and they didn't have people process in tech, and now they're out, I don't know, 10K, 100K, whatever dollar figure. That's an example. And we all hear about that. It still happens today. Risk and responsibility, this data responsibility pie. I want you to know this is a circle, not a line. No one's pointing fingers. You guys, as the data owner, you own the liability, the ultimate liability for the data that you process. That's your customer information, your client information, maybe healthcare information, maybe financial information, whatever it is you process for your users and your clients, you own the liability. And the reason you do is because we're going to come alongside you with the IT team and provide the technical solutions. The information security team is not only going to give you the risk insight, they're also going to help you with that process part, right? And then you need to take that information and you need to establish your risk tolerance. You establish your business objectives, which, oh, by the way, even if two companies are in the same industry, doesn't mean they have the same risk tolerance or the same business objectives. And then you establish the budget for protecting the data. And it really comes down to this. Remember, I kept saying from the beginning, this is all about risk. What risk level are you willing to accept to protect your most valuable assets? Well, how do we translate all this cyber gobbledygoo into something you guys can understand? Because I don't want to make your head explode here. We all live in a home, right? Whether it's a house or like this beautiful house here, or it's an apartment or a condo or whatever. So this analogy really helps people understand how do they get the right cybersecurity. First step is always to identify what you have, to identify in cyber, to identify your data. For your home, identify what it is you want to protect. These are very common answers I get. And you also have to categorize it. If my TV that I just bought 2 weeks ago gets stolen, I'm going to be sad. However, I'm going to get a much better TV through my insurance program because they no longer make the one they made 2 weeks ago, right? If my personal computer gets stolen, that is a much different story because that has the keys to my financial info, my family information, maybe where my kids go to school. That is something much more critical as far as data goes. How do we protect these things? I covered that a little bit earlier. Our defense in depth for our home, our doors, our windows, locking those, education. If you have teens at home, I hope you're educating them on how to responsibly and safely use social media like Facebook and Instagram. And please don't let them use TikTok. I'm begging you. Yard signs. We love those here in the US, don't we? Protected by Brinks, Simply Safe, Ring, etc. Detect. If someone gets past our protections, how do we detect they got past those? An alarm, motion sensor, my hacked doorbell ring camera, right? My nosy neighbors. How do I respond when one of those detections fires the alarm in the same way a SIM or an EDR can fire that alarm? We respond. May have an attack dog, may decide the situation's too dangerous and run away. Or if I'm Bob, I might pick up the phone and say, hey, information security, hey, Flagship networks, I screwed up. Please help me. Right? May call the police, may call the FBI if it's, bad enough, right? May come out with my baseball bat swinging because I'm going to protect what's mine, right? And how do we recover? Well, that handy dandy incident response plan that you've written and that you practice right here in your hand, I'll print it out. Your business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Don't forget that includes backups, your cyber insurance, your liability insurance, your homeowner's insurance. In Florida, I have to worry about hurricanes, so it may involve some emergency equipment there, right? And that's what we call the right cyber security. And what are the components? And these are very high level components. Please, unfortunately, this is not the end all be all. This is very high level. How do we know what we should have? Well, we're going to take what I just showed you. We're going to do a security assessment. And by we, I mean Tom is going to do a security assessment and figure out, he's going to talk to you. He's going to understand your business objectives, your risk tolerance, and put together a customized plan for you. And I'd like to end on this because I just gave you so much information, right? When I was a software developer, I used to have a boss who used to always say, the perfect is the enemy of done. And I was like, well, that sounds really fancy, right? So that must be a real quote. And it actually is. It's a Voltaire quote. Notice philosopher quote means I'm really smart, right? The perfect is the enemy of the good. Okay. And all I'm doing by telling you that is, as a software developer, we'd have certain requirements, like we needed to access a certain piece of data in 30 seconds. We need to process it in 15 seconds. And us crazy software developers would be like, oh, I did it, but I did it in 20 lines of code, and I bet I could do it in 5. Well, I bet I could do it in one really obscure line with no comments that no one will ever understand. And he used to always say, time out, guys. Perfect is the enemy of done. Get it done. And then if we have time to make it better, then we'll do it. I gave you so much information. I know your heads are exploding, and that's why you're not asking me all these questions. And just start somewhere. Start with Flagship Networks, develop a relationship, have those conversations. They are here to help you and to share in that data responsibility pie with you. And oh, by the way, before I hand it back to my friend Tom, I am going to address a question that we did get prior to the webinar. Someone asked about, are cloud backups enough for a small nonprofit? We understand you have limited dollars. What I'm going to say is not necessarily, because if those cloud backups are attached to your network and you get ransomware, I can assure you that that bad guy is also going to encrypt your cloud backups. Unfortunately, all goes back to risk tolerance. You have to combine your business objectives with your risk tolerance with a partner like Flagship that understands the threat landscape, and they are going to help you make those decisions and help you make a roadmap, right? Okay, so we actually have another question that just came in. I could see how MFA can prove ineffectual if it passes through the hands of a hacker. What other forms of security defenses would work better? Okay, so it's not that that there's a security defense that would work better. It's that it's all about defense in depth. There's always some attack that's going to defeat some protection. The one I showed you defeats MFA. But like I said, if he had managed detection and response, that could have helped thwart that attack. A SIM could have helped, depending on what the bad guys, the attackers' intentions were. A SIM could have helped, an MDR could have helped, security awareness training could have helped. It just depends on what the bad guys' goals were. And with that, I am going to hand this over to my friend Tom, and thank you for listening to me.
All right, Natalie, thanks so much. That was an incredible amount of information, and frankly, thank you for organizing it the way you did. I thought it really fed into itself very nicely. I think that question we got really feeds to the idea of defense in depth. We refer to it as layered security. We're looking at the framework that we follow at Flagship, which is modeled clearly on the NIST CSF. And it really is all about, putting layers on top of every area that you can think of, and constantly being vigilant. And again, to Natalie's point, our place in this conversation is to help. Every business is different. Every business has its own set of requirements. They're all a little different, even in the same vertical. So it's really about having that conversation, understanding what the risk tolerance is. What are the goals? What are the concerns? Really talk it through and start off and assess the environment. Take a good look at it. You don't know what you don't know. And so it's identifying what's going on there. What are the great things you already have going, and where do you need help? So to that end, hopefully we've done a bit of answering questions here.
So Tom, You're obviously very smart too, because you know where you what you don't know that what you don't know comes from. That's actually Socrates. All I know is that I know nothing.
Look at that. See, I can quote a philosopher without even knowing it.
Awesome.
I didn't know I knew that. Just a quick blurb about us. So, Flagship Network's been around for going on 23 years, I think. Oh yeah, it's in 23 years. And again, our where we looked at things a little differently is that there are certainly uh, these concepts around playbooks, right? There's some standards, and again, now we have that great slide with all the different aspects of cybersecurity. It's figuring out what's the right combination. It's basing it on the risk tolerance. It's basing it on the business that you're in. It's understanding, how does your budget play into this? That's always a big factor. How do we use the funds the best way possible to get the most result immediately? And it's conversation. We start with that conversation. The idea of the risk assessment is a reason we circle that on the slide. We do the cyber risk assessment, and again, note what you're doing great and find out where the gaps are and see where we can fix them. So, um, anybody else? Any other questions from our audience? I know we had a couple go so far, but any others? What are you seeing out there, Jeff? Anything?
I am not seeing anything else in either the chat or Q&A function. So, oh wait, oh no, nothing right now. Do you guys have any questions for each other, Tom and Natalie?
So Natalie, I'll give you one. So I'm an SMB. I'm in manufacturing. I've got backups. I've got to answer this cybersecurity questionnaire. Uh, what are three things that you'd want to make sure we're doing as a small business to give ourselves at least a chance to have a leg up on cybersecurity?
So actually two things, and I'm surprised I forgot to touch on this. The very two first things I would do is make sure that you're using password managers. Um, it's a good way to make sure you have good, strong passwords. It's a good way to make sure you're not reusing passwords. And then I combine that with multi-factor authentication. That is a really good low cost place to start. Then I would say the next thing to do is have an incident response plan, because you don't want to be caught in a situation where you're panicking and you don't know what to do next. And that's something, Flagship, I'm sure, can help with, because you guys are experienced in the field and you know how to help them create one of those correctly, where you're identifying roles versus identifying exact people and knowing what should happen. And a really important part about that incident response plan is to do exercises around that and to include everyone in your company, because everyone will come from a different perspective. I mean, there's special attack vectors you'll see happen in the financial industry, and certain attacks you'll see in the financial industry, and you'll see certain attacks against like your financial people, even within another industry, or against your HR people. So like managed detection and response is also a really good technology to have if you're, as far as technology goes, right? That would want to be one of those right up there, because that would really help, like in the situation where, you get a supposed invoice or a supposed resume that's really malware, because that would catch those because it relies on AI and machine learning and behavior analytics. It knows, unlike an antivirus that doesn't know, it would know if you were if a PDF or a Word document were launching some type of script that it shouldn't launch.
Yep.
Okay, so we just actually got asked another question. It says hard to feel safe these days when LastPass password manager got hacked. Well, let me tell you why LastPass got hacked. LastPass got hacked because they were not following good security practices. I'm going to toot my own horn for a minute here, and it's really not my own horn because I'm a moderator. But Bryson Medlock, who is a part of our cyber research unit here at ConnectWise, extremely smart man. I want to be as smart as him one day. So our cyber research unit is a bunch of very highly credentialed, very specialized people that work in our security operations center. Those are the people, that's the M in MDR, the managed detection and response part of EDR. They are also very highly credentialed, very smart people, and we do an excellent job of keeping those people happy because there's very high turnover in security operations center. Proud to report that I've been working with some of the same, a lot of the same SOC analysts and CRU people for over 4 years now. And most of them started at the company that ConnectWise acquired that I was with prior to that, before me. That says a lot about that company and ConnectWise, because that's very unusual. They do a lot of research on threats and what threat actors are doing and predicting what's going to happen next. And they put all of that information back into our tools. We did a webinar on LastPass and how to select a password manager. You have to know, and I would highly recommend, it's pretty short. Bryson goes into a great explanation of what you should look for in a password manager. And it talks about things like, encryption. What encryption algorithms are they using? Not only does a password manager encrypt your data, but they shouldn't be storing anything to decrypt that. They shouldn't be able to get to your usernames and passwords either. And they should be doing multiple layers of encryption on that data. And it talks about how LastPass wasn't really doing that. And also, the important thing is the reason that I would no longer do business with LastPass is because of, number one, they're not meeting the standards that a password manager should meet. And number two, they did a horrific job on telling the truth and what happened in that hack. They were not forthcoming or straightforward or honest at all. That's another piece of advice I would give you. It's a matter of if, not a matter of when. So if something does happen at your organization, you want to be very honest with your clients. And that is going to do a lot for your reputation if you're honest. Don't try to cover it up. Don't try to stick your head in the sand and pretend it didn't happen. Be honest. And some of these tools, not only can they protect and detect, they can also help you in the case where something does happen. Okay. So we have a customer in healthcare who did have an incident. A bad guy got into their system, into their email. But because they had a security information and event management system, we were able to prove without a shadow of a doubt that the bad guy never accessed any PHI, the protected health information, nor did the bad guy access any PII, personally identifiable information. Boy, that's getting hard to say. So they didn't have a legal breach. So they didn't have to report it as a breach. So they didn't lose on their reputation. They didn't have to, a lot of times you have to pay fines under these privacy laws. And under HIPAA, it's very strict. They would have had to pay hefty fines. And the Department of Health and Human Services would have publicly announced that they'd had a breach. And because of that, they didn't have to. Okay, in your experience, are some of the public cloud providers more secure than others? Again, it's all about your research. That's why you want to work with a good provider, a trusted advisor like Flagship. They can answer what works best for your environment. So what password manager would you recommend? I would recommend that you follow, make sure they're using modern encryption practices and that they are, I would look at their history and see if they've had any breaches, what kind of breaches they've had. And I would also, it's all about your risk tolerance. I personally use 1Password. I use it personally and professionally, but I'm not recommending any particular one. There's a bunch of good ones out there. The worst place you could store your username and passwords is your browser. If you are storing your usernames and password in your browser, you have been breached, period. Somebody has that information. Change it, start using a password manager. And I say personally, a family plan costs me about $65 a year. How many Starbucks is that? Or how many lunches out? Probably less than one these days. And with that, I'm off my soapbox now. Back to you guys.
With that nice piece of advice, it's certainly practical for all of us personally and in business. So anyway, thank you, Natalie and Tom. Great presentation. nice to get some additional questions in there at the end, and we were able to cover them.